Welcome to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck, you and I open a new chapter for Indications and Warnings, for bullet points, and for surveying the zero line in Ukraine with this recorded video format under the banner of New Century War College. While the War College is not granting degrees, it will give citizen listeners a real-time understanding of what's happening on the zero line, a deeper understanding of tactical and strategic successes and failures, and a critical understanding of the war's momentum. We are collaborating with the Information Warfare Initiative, a group of content creators from all around the world focused on Ukraine. The New Century War College will host a number of military experts and analysts. It's our privilege, Chuck, to present the very first content here.
Yeah, Alan, it's great to have had this opportunity. The Information Warfare Initiative, as you said, it's gathering about 20, possibly up to 50 of the premier content producers, analysts, and personalities in the information space of the Ukrainian war. I was very flattered to be asked, as you were, to join this, and triply flattered that we are the first program to be produced under the Information Warfare Initiative. New Century War College is going to be a pillar of the IWI, and in it, we are not only going to be producing our programming 5 days a week for Indications and Warnings, a daily show, an hour long. We are also going to be branching out into interviewing some of the leading lights of the war in Ukraine, personalities from various spectrums and viewpoints. And I'm just happy to be here with you, Alan.
It's great to be on air with you too, Chuck. We've graduated, I guess, from radio to television, but I've got my radio face with me.
Me too. I was going to bring a mask, but I'm just going to have to go with a Bigfoot costume.
Not Halloween. Right. On today's 60-minute program, day 952 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Chuck and I will look into Russia's reliance on the CAB glide bombs launched from Russian airspace, by the way. We'll consider the execution of 16 surrendered Ukrainian soldiers by Russian combatants. We'll ask who's winning the drone war. And yes, we will walk you through maps of Vuhledar, Kupiansk, and Kursk. Chuck, this has been the deadliest summer for Ukrainian civilians since the war began. Aside from Russia's relentless aerial attacks with drones and missiles, it's Russian glide bombs that are inflicting a lethal toll. Just to give listeners a sense of the scale of Russian attacks, in 1 week in September, Russia launched more than 900 guided bombs, around 400 Shahed drones, nearly 30 missiles of various types, invariably aimed at civilian targets and utility infrastructure.
You know, we've been covering the war, Alan, together for more than 900 days. We've come to grips with Russian tactics, techniques, procedures, the manner in which they conduct the war. I regret to say that we've been commenting for most of that time on Russian proclivity to target high-density civilian population centers, infrastructure, which some might say, well, that is a legitimate target in war, but the Russian enthusiasm goes far beyond that. the cities of Kharkiv, uh, other places are just being decimated by these bombs. And what they lack in accuracy, they more than make up for with explosive warheads that are measured in tons. We've been talking for a long time that more than 98% of the time when Russia fires a precision strike munition, it is aimed at a city. And infrastructure be damned. The larger the apartment block, being a hospital or a health facility, Russia's destroyed more than 1,500 of those, approaching 2,000 clinics and hospitals. It's not an accident. If we look at the conduct of the Russian war in Syria, we see the same thing. Virtually every hospital in Syria has been destroyed. It's the manner in which they wage war. And as horrendous as it is, it's been proven through history, it does not affect the willingness of a people or their unity in times of warfare. London was not bombed into submission by the Blitz. It doesn't work.
I follow several people from Kharkiv. Just overnight, there was a terrible glide bomb attack on a high-rise residential building in Kharkiv while people slept. I still don't have the toll of killed and injured from that attack, but Vovchansk, just northeast of Kharkiv, this has been completely destroyed. It was a small town, roughly 14,000 Ukrainians lived there, but completely destroyed by glide bombs primarily. It is a ruin.
And we had an especially impressive demonstration of Russian aerial capabilities. Vovchansk this week was hit by what initially I don't blame a civilian for looking at a very big explosion and not being able to determine what sort of ordnance it was. People were thinking it was a fuel aerosol bomb, which works by charging the air around itself with fuel vapor and igniting it. And that makes a terrific explosion. That's the mother of all bombs that is deployed by the United States out of cargo planes. The bomb is so big. Wow. But the bomb that hit Vovchansk this week was merely a 2-ton glide bomb, 2 tons of explosive. The explosion is flabbergasting, a 1,000-foot mushroom cloud. Again, and the circumstances of that airstrike, apparently it followed an unsuccessful Russian attack. As vengeful as it could be, it didn't precede the attack. It wasn't designed to soften up the Ukrainian resistance. It was lobbed into there as an act of revenge. And that, to me, that's Ruski Mir. That's what they export. Moonscape. That's what they want Ukraine to be.
If they can't win a battle, or if they cannot take a town, they will destroy it. This is what they did to Bakhmut. It's what they've done to Chasiv Yar. It's what they have done to Vuhledar, did to Vovchansk. Now, the glide bombs in particular, Chuck, are launched from within Russian airspace. This is why the debate around allowing Ukraine to use long-range weapons, especially those supplied by the United States, to strike these Russian targets inside Russia. The airfields where the Russian bombers are launched from that launch these glide bombs into Ukraine that are now reaching as far as Zaporizhia city, by the way.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me. There is this hand-wringing and this fickleness out of Washington. The United States has not provided Ukraine with any weapons that are capable of hitting Russian air bases 600 miles from the frontier. Ukraine has created those weapons herself. They have built drones, which of course come in at low speed. They're not very big. They come in at low altitude, low speed. Ukraine has also repurposed the Neptune missile as a surface-to-surface weapon. Doesn't sound like much to a civilian, but to take a naval strike missile and turn it into a surface-to-surface long-range precision strike munition, you don't just do that with one screwdriver or wave a magic wand. Every time I see a Russian glide bomb attack taking place, I go back to that mantra that I never let go of. I'm like a terrier with a squeaky toy, and that is air defense, air defense, air defense. There are dozens of air defense complexes and systems in the NATO inventory. One of them, just off the top of my head, the Hawk missile system, a highly portable, compact, capable battlefield zero-line system. You can tow a Hawk missile battery behind a Humvee. Its sensor packages are not much bigger, designed to be employed at the zero line. We're not sending them. They have onesies and twosies that they've received from Spain. There were 8,000 of these systems produced for NATO. They were so effective that they never shot down an enemy aircraft in combat because they were feared as a highly effective system. If we give Ukraine the air defense assets it needs, it will be able to defend its population centers and hospitals. It will be able to defend its troops on the zero line, and it will be able to start downing some of these glide bombs, not all of them, but some of them, as they're inbound towards their targets. And the glide bombs that cannot be intercepted, having those forward deployed air defense systems are going to make the Russians have to back off farther. And their glide bombs are not terribly accurate. So the farther back you put them, the less accurate they'll become. And here's the big caveat and but. They're aiming at a city center, right? So if they're off by 200 yards, they still get to kill people in their beds, and that's what they're trying to do.
Or to kill people at shopping centers, in markets, in rail terminals, in schools. The civilian targets that Russia chooses and destroys are the core of life. We all recognize this core of life. I've suggested to people, you want to get some sense of what the Russians are doing to Ukraine. Walk down to the hospital where you gave birth to your child, or in my case, where I saw my daughter born. Take a picture of it and then stop and think. That hospital ruined, destroyed by a Russian glide bomb, and 1,500 more all around Ukraine. That'll give you some sense of how you might feel witnessing one of these attacks on the heart of Ukrainian life.
Yeah, this is a war of aggression. This is a war that is being waged by criminals. These are criminal acts of aggression. I hate to revisit these tragedies, but I think people need to get an idea of who we're dealing with. 600 women and children were gathered in the Mariupol Drama Theater, a huge building in Mariupol where they had taken refuge. They painted the word children in 20-foot letters in the parking lot, and a laser-guided Russian bomb crashed through the roof and killed hundreds of them. That's a war crime. That wasn't an accident. That bomb didn't fall off the guy's outer wing pylon. It was an act of murder. These were unarmed civilians taking refuge in the most substantial building they could find. Not to put too fine a point on it, the pilot's a war criminal. The guys who loaded the weapon on his aircraft are war criminals. The person who gave the order is a war criminal. And we can only hope that they will be brought to justice.
Identified and prosecuted. Tens of thousands of war crimes have been committed by the Russians in Ukraine. And Chuck, unfortunately, we see new evidence every single day of such war crimes and atrocities. Disturbing evidence came to our attention through drone footage showing 16 Ukrainian soldiers who had laid down their weapons and surrendered, being executed by Russian combatants. What the Russians do is brazen, committing war crimes in full view of the world. And I would, having seen this video, I would have to call this a Nazi level atrocity.
There's no question about it. It is sickening to watch that. These were disarmed combatants. Several of them, if not the majority of them, wounded, put on a bus, driven to a remote location, taken off the bus, and executed out of hand. You're not over the fence to call this a Nazi-level atrocity. It is precisely what the SS and the Wehrmacht, in many cases, did during World War II. They did it to Russian personnel. They did it to partisans. They did it to civilians. And let us not forget, during the Battle of the Bulge, they did it to several groups of American soldiers. They killed them out of hand. You don't get to do that, right? Whether or not you are a party to the Geneva Convention, you don't dispose of enemy prisoners. You take receipt of those people in their surrender, and you are obligated to protect them. I think this is another example of how rotten the Russian military is. Not just morally bankrupt. It's so easy to dismiss that as, oh, it's over the top, but it's symptomatic. In this same week, old folks' homes being targeted by Russian glide bombs, prisoners being executed on the battlefield, drones be damned. And this isn't speculation. There is the video. Did this just start occurring? Look at Bucha, look at Izium, look at Mariupol, look at any of these places. This war has been criminally conducted from the outset.
Now,
and I hate to say it, but this is the legacy of the Russian military. It's how they fight. It's how they fought from times immemorial.
Something must be done to warp the psyche of a Russian soldier on the battlefield in order to carry out such an execution. 16 disarmed, surrendered, helpless Ukrainian soldiers. It just shot in cold blood, apparently machine gunned. What is the psyche of a soldier that pulls the trigger in such an event?
I make no excuses for these guys, and justice will come to them. Likely karma is going to get them on the battlefield, but Russian troops are being led from defeat to defeat to defeat. Now, absolutely, they have gained ground this summer. We predicted that last Christmas when Mike Johnson decided he wanted to do something about the U.S.'s balance of trade by blocking the weapons and equipment and ammunition that we'll go into this later, but we are obligated to help Ukraine. We see a military where the morale in the Russian armed forces is abysmal. And even where they have gained terrain, it has been at an incredible cost. So we talked about this summer being the deadliest for Ukrainian civilians. It has also been the deadliest for Russian soldiers. They've lost more than 100,000 soldiers this summer. UK Defense Intelligence says between March and August, they lost 70,000. We add another 30,000 to that, 100,000 killed, wounded, and missing. Those Russian soldiers who threw those Ukrainian prisoners off that bus, they were venting their frustration and taking it out, as all bullies do, as all sociopaths do. They take it out on the most helpless people they can find. But it also shows me a military that's utterly out of control, right? Alan, if you and I are soldiers and I tell you shoot those prisoners, that's an unlawful order. It's unlawful for me to even give that order, suggest it. You could turn around to me and go, you're under arrest. If you follow that order, you're culpable. You can't say the colonel told me to do it. In the Russian military, those guys probably volunteered to do it. They're rapists, they're murderers, they're burglars, they're thieves, they're looters. That kind of army wobbling on that edge of criminality and out of control, it isn't going to work. Those are the kind of armies that lose, not win.
It's certainly not the kind of army you want to see return home either, if you're Vladimir Putin.
Exactly. War takes a toll on everyone who has been through it. Imagine what these people are going to be like when they return to society. Notice I didn't say try to integrate, or that isn't going to happen. We've already seen in Russia some of the soldiers released from prison, felons, rapists, murderers, who somehow survived a tour, returned to Russia, where several of them have run amok, killed, stabbed, used axes. They're returning as a bacillus, as a pathogen to Russian society. But I think the hurt and the rot goes so much deeper than that. It truly does. These Russian soldiers are also preyed upon by their own officers who extort them, divert their paychecks, sell them food, clothing, boots. It's like working for the company store. That's unimaginable. But you know what? More importantly, Alan, it's not sustainable. An army like that is not going to stay together.
Well, that army sacrificing, so many tens of thousands of troops over the summer in order to take just a sliver of land in Donetsk and Luhansk, just literally a sliver of land, while the Ukrainians, of course, boldly entered Kursk. We'll get to that comparison later in the show. And to those listeners who have seen this drone footage, it seems likely from a Ukrainian drone, no doubt. It's grainy. It's absolutely clear what is happening and what the final event is. It's wounded Ukrainian soldiers on the ground being shot at close range. That's a description. We're not going to show the video, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest that listeners try to find it and view it. It's atrocious.
There's a nihilism abroad in the Russian army. To enter the conflict with a total lack of rules, of morality, of good or evil, and it's so much different than a Russian patriot volunteering to fight for his country. That isn't what we're talking about here. It is a depraved person that conducts themselves like that on a battlefield. It's murder. You cease to enjoy the legal protections that a soldier has when you commit an act like that. You're a criminal. You're a murderer. And we're not talking about just one occurrence here. This happened again earlier in the month. Unfortunately, it's going to continue. The other thing that is so absolutely counterproductive in this is that it hardens the resolve of your adversary. If your adversary thinks there's no point in surrendering because they're going to murder me anyway, and you look at the other side of the coin, it's exactly the opposite of what Ukraine is doing. They've got 1-800 numbers. You can call them and arrange your surrender. You'll live. You'll complete the war and get 3 hot meals and a place to sleep. And maybe you'll get traded. That's as different as it could be. And we see the manner in which Russia treats Ukrainian POWs. Numerous reports saying they weren't fed for the first 40 days. They received no food. It's Russia, a nation, psychopathology there, sending this message. We'll return human skeletons to you for the people you fed, you clothed, you kept safe from harm, you provided medical care for. We're going to trade you back broken, starved men. There is right and wrong. There is karma. I promise you, Russia is not going to win this war. And I promise you, people will be taken account. They will be taken account.
And I agree with that, Chuck. I also agree with there's karma. I mean, virtually every Ukrainian prisoner of war who was exchanged has been starved, has been tortured in the worst possible ways you can imagine. They are permanently scarred and injured. That's what it will come down to. These are young men. There was a story just last week after a prisoner exchange of a young man who had lost his ability to speak because of torture. And this is his ability to speak or to express emotion of any kind, not only because what was done to him in a Russian prison, but because what he saw being done to his fellow prisoners. Now, the happy ending to that story, not only his return, but his recovery of his speech and his ability to express emotion. I guess I would say to listeners, look up this video, and Chuck and I will see to it that video is posted, because it's in the horror of this war, it is a hopeful video to watch.
Yeah. There are good guys and there are bad guys. It sounds corny, but it's true. You only need to look at the conduct of Russian soldiers in the field. Look at what happened in Bucha, right? At first, I assessed that quite wrongly as a Russian army running amok, but they were carrying out orders to kill, murder, rape. But all you need to do also is look at the streets of Bucha, and you saw them littered with destroyed Russian vehicles. They were trying to get out of town. They were annihilated. Don't ever forget the valiant stand that Ukraine made to beat back the Russian attack on Kyiv. They destroyed the Russians. They drove them back over the border, piggly wiggly and helter skelter.
Well, we hope to see more of that in in the coming years because this war will probably go on for that long. You know, Chuck, there's a war within the war in Ukraine. It's the drone war. And there is a race on for achieving superiority. Ukraine is winning, not only in terms of innovation, but in speed and numbers of drones manufactured. The Institute for the Study of War summarized a report from President Zelensky just earlier this month. I think it was on October 1st. Ukrainian companies, and there are some 500 of them, by the way. Some of them are mom and pop drone factories. I mean, we'll stop and think about that in a minute. But Ukrainian companies can currently produce about 4 million drones annually. And, you know, Ukraine is going to get, I guess, to half that number in 2024. But this is well beyond what Russia can produce. Putin says they will increase drone production by tenfold to 1.4 million. That gives you some idea of how far ahead Ukraine is in drone production. But you just watch what Ukraine is able to do with their drones on the battlefield or on the Black Sea. They are well ahead in innovation. And I also was interested to see that Ukraine has founded drone operator schools so that they are training drone operators in drone warfare and tactical integration with ground units, everything from infantry to artillery. So I see this war within a war, drone production by Ukraine. It's Ukraine winning it, but how they use the drones on the battlefield is also a sign of how they are winning this race for superiority.
And interestingly, you just stated that Putin plans to increase his production of drones tenfold to 1.5 million. And that's great. I like to point out to our Russian listening guests, there is producing drones and there is producing drones. There's a lot more going on than just the numbers of drones you produce. It's the type of drones. Are they fixed wing? Are they long range? Are they short range? Are these reconnaissance drones? Are these strike drones? And then there is this magical secret sauce there among several things they'll talk about. But one of the first ones is your ability to integrate the capabilities of these drones to your objectives on the battlefield. Russia has been playing catch up with that, and Ukraine is the protagonist here that is advancing the tactics. The other thing is, if you produce 1.5 million drones and they are operating with last year's operating systems, they are not capable of using AI in their targeting. Their means of communicating data and flight controls, if that is open to exploitation, they're going to be useless. And I won't talk a lot about this, but there have been some incredible developments in the means by which Ukraine controls its own drones. We often see a first-person drone closing in on a Russian target, and you'll see the picture go fuzzy as it closes in. That's indicative of an electronic warfare countermeasures unit on the Russian vehicle itself. Often you'll see the drone coming in and there'll be a little blinking light that'll say low battery or land now. Those are also countermeasure signals transmitted by Russian vehicles. Ukraine is already applying a networked approach with each drone with individual flight characteristics, the ability to frequency hop that cannot be matched by the Russians. Their electronic countermeasures won't work. There's always a battle between countermeasures and targeting. It just goes on and on. So when Putin says he's going to produce 1.5 million drones, I'm just telling you, the 1.5 million drones you're producing now are not anything like the drones that Ukraine is putting on the battlefield. And again, it comes down to that ineffable amount of software, the capability of the drone itself. And we haven't seen this yet, but we will. A true interactive AI-driven swarm attack by a couple of hundred Ukrainian drones launched, will converge on a target, will determine their own vectors of attack, will coordinate themselves in flight to overwhelm and destroy targets. We already see that capability in some very expensive NATO hardware, like the Brimstone missile, which can be fired in volleys of 3. They communicate with each other as they close on the target. One can literally say, I'll go high and come in from the top. The other one will say, I'm going around the barn. And the third one will go up the middle. And any combination of the above. That's what Russia is going to be facing.
That's amazing. That the Brimstone missile, for example, has such integrated communication. I mean, I just am almost stunned by that.
Too, it's evil geniuses. But that is what's coming to the present generation of Ukrainian drones. So that's just it. And the electronic environment, the electronic warfare environment in which every drone operates, it changes on the battlefield. It's constantly changing. There's this constant battle between countermeasures and targeting modalities, et cetera. But Ukraine has also shown its ability, and we've seen numerous targets. The targets, as long-range drones are coming in at somewhere around 100, anywhere from 160 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour, and in some cases, 300 or 400 miles an hour, we see local Ukrainian assets, agents, operators, assets, whoever they are, around the target who release short-range drones in the minutes before the longer-range drones arrive. Incredible. James Bond level stuff. And it's happened at least on 10 occasions that I know about, and probably 100 that we don't. Remember the raid against the IL-76 base? Was that at, I cannot remember the name of the place, but that was it.
Yeah. That was inside Russia. And then also partisans are active around Zhankoy, for example, the airfield in Crimea, which has also been struck by Ukrainian forces by drones more than once. But it strikes me, it must be terribly exciting to be working in this sector of weapon development, and that is innovating with drones. Everything from drone tactics to protecting the drone from electronic warfare on the battlefield, to the communication drone to drone, and also to the durability of drones, the durability of battery life and the distance a drone can travel. It just has got to be an exciting part of weapon development to be working in.
You think 900 days ago, first-person racing drones were the domain of mega geeks who used to go into big abandoned buildings and see if they could fly them around. It was definitely a niche sort of pastime. And now you have a rifle squad on a 21st century battlefield. You're going to have riflemen, a grenadier, an automatic weapons man, a radio man, and unless you have a drone operator, you're doomed. And going forward for the rest of human history, if you are in an infantry outfit, you are going to have drone capability. And just even back in my career, you had to be in SEAL Team 6 or Delta Force to have drone assets working for you.
Wow.
And again, they were not portable. These are Predators, these were Reapers, these were high endurance, high altitude systems. And at the end of my career, drones for, organic to our units were just coming in. So, and now way beyond.
If you want to learn about drone warfare, drone tactics, you had better be talking to a Ukrainian, and you had better be taking notes. They are the primary innovative force in drone development. The other thing that strikes me about drones, Chuck, is the way the Russians have chosen to use them. In Kherson, what are the Russians doing? They are flying drones into Kherson city to basically run down civilians on the street. That's what it comes down to. You're on the sidewalk in Kherson, you're walking to the market, or you're walking home. There is a Russian drone to run you down and kill you, a civilian, on the streets in Kherson. And yet, the Russians clearly have military needs for their drones in along the Dnipro River here, but they choose to use them to terrorize civilians in Kherson.
That shows you that, it isn't about anything tactical. It isn't about anything of any military utility whatsoever. Russians are in the habit of attacking civilian vehicles that are, driving by the river, as you said. We can talk about some Russian targets in Kherson, a maternity hospital, a chemotherapy clinic, the general clinic, polyclinics. What can you say? And, you would ask yourself, well, why are they doing this? Well, this could be one reason. 400 Ukrainian soldiers on the south bank around the village of Krinky held off a Russian VDV division and fought it into absolute disarray. 20,000 Russian paratroopers could not take the one-horse town of Krinky. I see this, I can't try to connect this and rationalize. The frustration of these Russian soldiers is evident. Their combat effectiveness is abysmal, and they know it, and they lash out wherever they can at civilians. Kherson is unfortunately ground zero for that Russian hatred.
Yeah, I think Kherson is the best example of that. It would make more sense for a Russian commander to say to that Russian drone operator, you just wasted a drone. There's no military objective you are achieving by running that drone down the streets of Kherson city. But no, it's a Russian terror tactic.
Attacking ambulances.
Yeah.
You imagine the atrocity, you can find the video.
Yep. Well, we should take a look at the maps, I think. We've reached that point in the broadcast here. First, to take a look at the map of Vuhledar, where Ukrainian forces have withdrawn after 31 months of defending that fortress. And then on to maps of Kupiansk and Kursk. In Vuhledar, Chuck, Ukrainian forces escaped from the center of the city, escaped an encirclement. I think we're pretty sure of that.
Yeah, I think they got away clean. The writing was on the wall here in Vuhledar for a while. The decision was made by the high command. This wasn't a place to make a stand in terms of tactical or strategic value, Vuhledar just doesn't have it. If you are looking at our map here, we've got a series of them. I think we'll get the producers to put up a number of them. As you pull back from Vuhledar, you can see there is almost nothing around it. They're agricultural fields. Vuhledar itself was a sort of a pleasant community that was built for the miners who worked at a series. There were 3 coal mines around Vuhledar. The town itself had a number of multi-story apartment blocks. They were surrounded by parkland and very pleasant parks. It looked like a pretty nice place to live. It, of course, is an apocalyptic wasteland now. Ukraine made the correct decision in pulling out of here. As you said, 31 months. They've held the Russians off. The Russians suffered one of their biggest defeats of the entire war at Vuhledar. Battle of Vuhledar 1, they lost 40 tanks and somewhere around 140 armored personnel carriers in the course of 2 days combat, about 6 hours fighting per day. Alan, I can remember you and I went through we watched the videotape of that battle, and the military malpractice, the Russian officers commanding it and the troops carrying out these attacks, it was a soup sandwich. It was incredible that it was so inept. Their losses were so heavy. But we commented again at the time, if there ever was a time in this war for Ukraine to counterattack and drive back a crushed and fleeing enemy, it would have been at Vuhledar. Mm-hmm. They don't have the arms and equipment to roll those dice. They can't count on the United States to back them up. So 31 months of defending this place, I think, as we'll see in a couple other instances in this war, the Battle of Krinky perhaps, this was a triumph as a feat of arms that they have done this. They've inflicted at least in the neighborhood of 30,000 Russian casualties just in combat related to this town. That number may be twice as high. I'm giving you the absolute most conservative estimate, 30,000 Russian dead here. The hardest thing in the world is to break contact with your enemy and withdraw in good order. And we saw the Ukrainians do that. That is the most complex and difficult evolution in ground maneuver warfare. So Vuhledar is no more, but Ukraine got away.
We saw the Russians change tactics finally as they launched this final assault on Vuhledar. Rather than these armored columns in line in daylight, finding their way across minefields by finding the mines. But they changed their tactics. Just a few days ago, launching a massive artillery and missile assault on Vuhledar. Now, traditionally, that is how a ground assault begins.
Yeah, and as impressive as that barrage was, Vuhledar was one of those Soviet-designed and post-Cold War designed dwelling place. Each one of these buildings have deep underground basements. They are interconnected by service and utility tunnels, and also deliberately built tunnels and fallout shelters, much as we saw in the Azov steel plant, which was built to a standard where they expected could survive a nuclear strike. We're talking concrete, reinforced concrete, 3 feet thick, blast doors, etc. So as impressive as that Russian artillery barrage was, I don't think it really punished a lot of the Ukrainian occupiers. It's funny, that stands out as such an amazing demonstration to us That's standard Soviet and Russian doctrine. It shows that they're not even fighting to their own doctrine. It's unimaginable for a Western military to put together an assault that is not preceded by an incredible artillery barrage. That's what you have artillery for.
Right. I guess
So,
I would also presume that the Russian forces occupying Vuhledar are exhausted or culminated. I wouldn't expect them to occupy Vuhledar and choose their next destination on the battlefield.
right, and we've seen this in a number of occasions. It is the manner that this war has traditionally been conducted by the Russians. We saw the same thing in Severodonetsk when they finally took the city. Again, another place where the Ukrainians were able to break contact and get away cleanly because the Russian army was exhausted. They were culminated. They were fought out. We saw the same thing after the Battle of Bakhmut. The Russian military was culminated. It couldn't take Chasiv Yar, and it still hasn't taken Chasiv Yar. Vuhledar, we're seeing the same thing happen again. You never see Russia taking a city in the manner in which it's supposed to be done. You bypass the city and you link up around it and you surround it. The Russians don't do that. Western militaries do that because it is the most expedient and cost-effective means of doing it. Preserving your resources, chief among them are your experience, the lives of your soldiers. Russians don't do that. They simply don't care. They don't care how many people they kill. They don't care how many of their own people are killed. There is no military genius. They don't even operate to their doctrine. It's truly the meat wave. And that goes from platoon-sized attacks. And when we get up to talk about Kupiansk today, the Russians have put on another clinic of what not to do if you are an army officer.
Well, we should move up to Kupiansk, Chuck, and maybe the two things that strike me about Kupiansk, of course, the Russian superiority of forces, which they have all across the zero line. But the second thing is their map reading ability or inability, I should say.
Wow. So I'm sure we're going to put in map section here of Kupiansk. That this latest Russian kludge occurred. The Russians have pushed across the H-26 highway and extended a salient south of Kupiansk, extending toward the Oskil River. So this happened this week. I'll be putting together later in the week for the Kyiv Post. We do a segment on there called Point of Impact, and we took apart this battle and why it failed over there. But Russian forces, they are so badly trained they can't do anything at night. So the decision was made by the Russian officers to push this salient to the Oskil River. They concentrated a force of 60 tanks and infantry fighting vehicles west of a little town called Pischane. It didn't take long for Ukrainian drones to pick up on this. The Russian force used some attempt at terrain masking. They proceeded down a narrow valley towards the town of Kolinshkivka. When they got within about 4 kilometers of there, they split their force into a northern attack wing and a southern attack wing, which was going for Kurlianka in the south. So they split their force as they're approaching contact. Nobody apparently can read a map because the northern force passed to the north of a swamp and the southern force passed to the south of a swamp. The units were no longer in contact with each other. They were no longer mutually supported. One might as well have been fighting on Neptune and the other on Uranus. They were no longer connected. The Ukrainians were able to do, in war college parlance, defeat them in detail, which means you take on one of the Russian forces and then you switch to the other. And that is exactly what the Ukrainians did. They took on the northern force, which was 40 vehicles, about 15 tanks, and the remainder APCs. They destroyed that. Then they turned and destroyed the southern attack axes. This battle was over in, wait for it, 20 minutes. 20 minutes. From first contact until the last turret returned from the stratosphere and banged into the ground, this Russian effort was utterly destroyed. Only 5 vehicles remained damaged and off the battlefield. Interestingly enough, when the Russian soldiers started to dismount, not one of them continued the assault. Every one of them ran east. That's what we're looking at.
Well, I got to say, wouldn't you? I know I'd run east.
Well, everything came into play here. The Russians are incapable of achieving surprise on the battlefield. They operate only in daylight. This attack took place at like 10 in the morning. They're incapable of attacking at dawn. They can't do anything at night. They came on in column, bumper to bumper, perpendicular to the zero line, as we've said always. Only the first vehicle could fire at the Ukrainians. Meanwhile, Ukraine could put all their guns on the column. We've seen this attack, Alan. You and I have talked about dozens, if not scores, of attacks just like this. Every time the Russians operate at higher than platoon level, this is the result. That's why they're demoralized.
Russian military command on the zero line doesn't measure up, and the Ukrainians take advantage of it constantly. The Ukrainians are still hard pressed. Russia is able to advance not by concentrating forces necessarily, but simply by using the mass of forces, not particularly well. This is why Russian casualties are so phenomenally high. But imagine trying to hold off such a mass for as long as the Ukrainians have held it off. It's not easy. Ukraine still is outgunned in artillery by Russia. In other words, Russia can fire multiple times more artillery shells than the Ukrainians can fire back, but the Ukrainians are better at it. They have better counter battery fire. So it will take the Ukrainians just a few shells to take out a Russian artillery position, whereas Russia may never find that Ukrainian artillery firing at them. But it's this constant mass and the pressure exerted on Ukrainians. It's exhausting.
Well, the other thing is the continuing ineptitude of Russian field commanders to split your force before contact, to have your two axes of attack. You put a swamp between them. These are unconscionable mistakes. That operation is briefed in an environment where no one dared put up their hand and said, "Colonel, do you see the swamp there?" And this defeat, in 20 minutes, this was over. 20 minutes. An entire battalion of Russian forces. Nearly 1,000 men killed and wounded in 20 minutes. That in itself is a remarkable military achievement.
Yes, it is. And, we're going to move on to Kursk. And if you were to compare Ukrainian military planning in Kursk with Russian military planning in Kupiansk. It's night and day difference. And I think that someday, maybe this winter, when the Ukrainian forces have dug into their winter quarters, and we will all remark on the length of time that Ukraine has been able to hold on to some part of Kursk Oblast. Maybe we'll take a look in detail, but this has been such a well-planned operation. You can see the detail with which Ukraine planned this operation to reach specific locations, defensible, allowing them to dig in. Ukrainian engineers were part of this incursion force.
Absolutely. Ukraine really put this together. In 8 days, they captured more than 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory, more territory than the Russians have captured in their summer offensive. We put that into perspective. Ukraine has captured more terrain than Russia has captured. Engineers came in this tasking, 3 battalions of special forces, which is huge. I mean, that's way disproportionate. But it shows the forethought of the Ukrainian commanders. These special forces are now operating all over Kursk Oblast. They are calling in targets, they're conducting reconnaissance, they're interdicting high-value targets, they're keeping the Russians on edge, they're operating against the Russian ground lines of communication and supply. And in the meantime, the Ukrainian engineers are ever busy building winter quarters for their troops. Russia has sent upwards of 30,000 troops to operate against the Kursk salient. They're not doing very well. And to our Russian listening guests, soon it's going to start raining, and it will be mud season for 6 weeks. And then, to our Russian listening guests, you're going to wonder why your generals sold the winter uniforms. Why don't you have good boots? Why don't you have a decent coat? Where's your food? Just going out on a limb here, but I do not see spring coming and Russia having achieved any significant progress against the zone that is occupied by Ukraine. I think they're going to hold on to it. And just the fact that we know that Moscow will prioritize actions against the Kursk salient, it's going to make Ukraine's fighting actually easier. You know the Russians are coming at you. You know they're going to show up at 10 o'clock every morning. And once you ever know what the enemy is compelled to do, lured into doing, forced by his higher command to do, it's on you to wait for it. And Ukraine has not just built winter quarters, they've fortified their own ground lines of communication and supply. So they're there to stay, Alan.
That was actually my very next question, Chuck. How easy or difficult will it be to supply the Ukrainian troops in Kursk Oblast? But obviously, securing those ground lines of communication and supply, again, a painstaking planning. Ukraine knew how they were going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Russia is still suffering. And I encourage them to keep doing this. Every Russian unit commander has been told, you got too many truck drivers, you got too many cooks, you got too many radio men, we need riflemen, give me all your guys. So being in the transportation service in the military, that's a military occupational specialist, specialty. Being a logistician, knowing how to rig supply depots and dispersing your supplies and achieving just-in-time deliveries to your forces on the battlefield, it takes dedicated professionals to do that, not just truck drivers. So Ukraine has never lost sight of how important the logistical solutions are. And there isn't just one or two main arteries for Ukraine to support itself. In Kursk, There are dozens. There are 20 or 30, maybe 40 different routes in dispersed supplies, etc. It's one of the reasons why we see Russian ammunition dumps blowing up all over the place. Their logistical network is nonsense. They have big clumps of stuff out in the open. It's much, much harder to hit a Ukrainian ammunition dump. And you don't see that happen very often because they are dispersed and camouflaged, and they keep the supplies moving.
They actually keep them moving by drone as well. I have seen heavy lift Ukrainian drones delivering artillery ammunition to the front lines. Absolutely amazing. And you talk about just-in-time delivery. While it's insufficient numbers of shells, these heavy lift drones get the artillery ammo where it needs to be just in time.
Yeah. Again, it never happened on the battlefield before, right? An unmanned aerial vehicle delivering ammunition on time. It's incredible. And just, the amount of infantry, just, small arms ammunition, rifle ammunition that a soldier needs today, 600, maybe 1,000 rounds a day. It's pretty heavy. It's like not a big suitcase, but a half-size carry-on suitcase that probably weighs 20 pounds or so, 30, 35 pounds. Just delivering that to a rifleman on the line on time without exposing your own ground lines of communication, it's amazing. These are things that Ukraine is doing that no one else has ever done in history. We're going to continue to be amazed, actually.
I think we will be. Chuck, this is something of a first-time thing for us as well. I would call this the pilot broadcast of indications and warnings, but we will be back. I don't know exactly what the schedule looks like, but we'll let you know. So keep your eyes peeled. We'll be on again with approximately 60-minute programs. I think we went a little over today, Chuck, but that's for the real producer to take care of in the background, I think.
Yeah, and again, Alan, it's a great pleasure, and we were both honored to be selected by the Information Warfare Institute. And again, we're going to be doing program for the New Century War College as well, which is the way that civilians can interact with some of the subject matter experts. Where Alan and I will be going forward with interview programs as well. And inshallah, we're going to be having indications and warnings. We should be on 5 days a week, 1 hour programming at a time. And we will be. Thank you, Chuck, and thanks everyone for tuning in to this edition of Indications and Warnings with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. We will be back with future 60-minute programs, 60 minutes plus, here on New Century War College YouTube channel. Look for us on Spotify Radio as well. So thank you again, Chuck. Thanks to all of our listeners. Slava Ukraini. Героям слава.